Hey there! Welcome to episode 12 of the Xamarin Code Hour. This is the show where every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. I come to you live and do some live coding, and hopefully together we build out a Xamarin application and learn some things. And tonight's episode we're getting back to iOS, and in particular we're going to build out the navigation, the Hamburger menu, similar to what we've done in the last two episodes for Android, but now we're going to go back to iOS. And so you'll get a good opportunity to compare the way things look in Android land and the way things work in iOS land. You'll be able to compare how those two things look very similar, and then we'll be able to share some code between the two. So without any further ado, let's get started. So the very first thing, I guess, is to figure out what framework we want to use. And there is a couple of options. I did some research. There's no good, clear Hamburger menu that's built into iOS by default. And the reason for that is that iOS kind of discourages the Hamburger menu. They don't really like that design paradigm, but it's pretty common. Like Facebook does it, right? So, you know, hey, if Facebook does it, well, why can't we? So, but consequently, you have to do a little bit of extra work for it, and so you got to find a framework. Now, there's actually three that I found. I just did a quick web search and I found three. So I'll show you the three that I found, and the one that I settled on that we're going to use tonight. Oh, nope, there we are. Okay. This one I found is called Xamarin Sidebar by Josh DeLynn, I think was his name. Jack DeLynn. So that seemed like a good candidate. They had 83 stars, sounded like a good candidate. There was another one that was more popular, 98 stars, this by Clancy, called Flyout Navigation, and I found one called Slide Out Navigation by the Dylan B. And I ended up settling on this one. It looked like it was a little more low level. I did a little bit of research. I know I normally try not to do research ahead of the show, but I did. And so I settled on this one. And part of the reason was, if you go and take a look at the NuGet package, if we were to go and download it, you'll see that the owner of this package is none other than Martin Vander, Martin, M-A-R-T-I-J-N, who is one of the main creators of MVVM Cross. And so that speaks well to me. Also, I noticed that there are the most recent commits. I mean, a lot of these are a little old, but the most recent commit was last month, and that always speaks well to a project. So that was the one I was leaning towards. So let's install it. By the way, I suppose we should just make sure things still run. And in the process of trying to make this run, I'm going to say run now, just so we can just remind ourselves what the application was looking like as of like a month ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago now, because it's been a little while since we've built the Android. And one problem that I've been having, or I'm going to have to, I just had to juggle some things around, is that the simulator is not displaying correctly on Windows. And so this is what it looks like when it fails. I'm just going to go ahead and show it to you. This is expected. It just comes up with a blank screen. Now, this feature where you're able to take a look at your iOS application in Windows is a really nice feature. It'd be really cool if this just worked right now, but I think it's extremely unlikely to. This feature is actually provided by Visual Studio Enterprise. It's not a free feature, so I'm going to be kind of slumming it tonight and showing you the way that you do development if you're using the free version of all of the tools. And so the way to do this with the free version of the tools is, first of all, if you go into your iOS settings, that's Tools, Options, except there's this wonderful quick launch option up here in the upper right, which if you don't use this quick launch menu, you should. It's really a wonderful tool. But I just go into my iOS settings and I turn off the remote simulator to windows. I noticed, by the way, that there's an update here for Visual Studio, and I bet that fixes it, but probably a really bad idea to go and update Visual Studio right before going live, so I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is stop this and start this, and I'm going to remote desktop into my Mac. Like I talked about in one of the very beginning episodes, you have to have a Mac and to do iOS development. And then I'm going to use this tool called VNC Viewer, and VNC Viewer allows me to view my Mac just like with a remote desktop. And here the application is launching, and I have my Mac open right down below, down there, and that is it's the exact same screen I'm seeing, and as I move the cursor around, I'm seeing my mouse move around. So it's a little less than ideal that we're using this VNC viewer and remote desktoping in, because there's a little bit of a lag, and so unfortunately you, the viewer, are not going to be able to see the nice crisp, smooth animations that you've been accustomed to in previous shows, but that's the way things are going to have to be for tonight. And this is taking longer to load than it should, so maybe like last episode, we're going to have an iPhone 7. We're going to have lots of technical issues. Won't that be special? iOS 7. Let's launch this on the on the iPhone 7 device. And oh, you know, actually, this did look like it was maybe in the middle of crashing. You can do, they changed the way these simulators work so that they're all isomorphic again. I thought isomorphism was out, but apparently it is in, and so you get all these little buttons that act like real buttons, but they actually work. I don't know if I like it, but it's what they did. So you can shut this off by holding down the power button, just like you would hold down a real device, and that shuts down the simulator, or it should. Now I know I hit that play button before. It just crashed. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I had this working so nicely before the show started, and naturally, as soon as I started the show, things started going poorly. That's just how it goes. But one of the things that you can always do that helps a lot is, well, close and reopen Visual Studio, which I can try, or disconnect and reconnect from the Mac. And as you may recall, there's a live connection which is happening from the PC to the Mac in order to do iOS development. So that's just a little refresher, and you manage the status of it here in this little toolbar that shows the Xamarin Mac agent. Like I showed in an earlier episode, probably like episode 2 maybe, you have to do a couple things to get it set up. You have to do a couple things to get it set up. You have to turn on remote display or something like that, and wow, okay, we're just going to quit the simulator altogether, and I'm going to close and reopen Visual Studio. When in doubt, right? And if that doesn't work, I'm going to reboot my computer. No, hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. So, the very first thing I do once I've gotten this running is we're going to go into NuGet. We're going to download that package, and that's going to give us a lot of code for free. That is going to have a root view controller. It's going to have a we're going to need to implement a root view controller. Then we're going to need to implement a view controller for the side menu, and then we're going to need to implement a view controller for the main area. And then, once we have those 3 view controllers, then we're going to implement a UITableView in the left-hand nav. So in the left-hand nav, we're going to have a list of all the pages, and you're going to be able to swipe through them all and select one of them, and that's going to swap out the main content area with a second page. So if all goes well tonight, unfortunately we're already 11 minutes in, but if all goes well tonight, we will have learned how to pull down a package in iOS, refreshed ourselves on how iOS coding works, and more importantly, we'll also have implemented a table view, a UI table view, which is the same thing as a recycler view in Android or a list view in Android. And they're just called it's called a UI table view. Done a lot of talking, and Visual Studio has done a lot of loading, and it's been very slow. And it looks like I have a high CPU and I'm dropping frame rates. It looks like I'm dropping frame rates. I don't know if you're seeing those frame rates drop, but that is a little bit annoying. The good news is apparently, okay, this connected. The good news is that if you're watching live, I had someone watching live recently and they said that they were seeing the frame rates disappear, but when I went back and watched the the post-recorded episode, it didn't drop any frames at all. So it's a problem if you're watching this live and you're seeing frame rates drop. You can always go back and watch the episode or the parts that you missed. Maybe I get a more powerful PC at some point, and that will solve the problem. Or if I can figure out how to encode all this to my video card, which I couldn't figure out how to do. Okay, good news. We've got a simulator starting up, and if all goes well, the app has terminated. Error, can't launch a 32-bit app on a simulator that only supports 64-bit apps? Well, yeah, but I wasn't trying to launch a 32-bit app. I don't care what bitness it is. This is bizarre. I haven't made any changes to this. Let's clean. Sometimes it's just a matter of cleaning your solution, getting rid of everything out of the object directory and the bin directory, and this is the problem with live coding is, well, you get to learn what kinds of things can go wrong. And unfortunately, this is just very much a part of mobile development. Getting your environment set up the first time is hard, and getting it continually working is also hard. And it's not just a problem with Xamarin. This is a problem with most mobile development that I've done. Okay, so the thing is, I don't understand what it's talking about, but we're going to launch this on an iPhone 6s. Let's see if that works any better. And here it is loading up. Sadly, we're not going to get too far if this thing isn't working correctly. I'm curious. There's no settings that should have changed. We're still not linking. We're using the default SDK. i386, that should be correct. And the app crashed again. Alright, it might be time to Google this. Well, alright, if you say so. i386. Don't quite understand why this was working fine previously, but because I swear to you this had been working beautifully not 5 minutes before the show. What do you know? There we go. I wonder if that's also the problem. I don't know. You guys, is it worth trying to run this again on the local? No, let's not mess with it. Okay, so there we go. 8 plus 2 should be 10. Okay, great, and that's where we left things. I'm going to be quick and lazy, and I think the very first thing I'll do is probably just implement this CE button over here as the thing that opens the menu. So, whoops, don't, actually, yeah, incremental builds is kind of handy. That'll speed things up. Okay. We are going to add a reference to this project that I was telling you about called Sidebar Navigation, version 194. Martin van der Dijk, yes, that was his name. 194. We are adding the reference that has been brought in, and if we go back to the documentation here, and oh, the other reason that I liked this package was because the documentation was good, and that's worth a lot to me. So he tells you, hey, listen, you need your own root view controller, and in that root view controller, that guy's going to be responsible for instantiating a sidebar controller, which is what this library provides. It provides a sidebar controller, and it tells you to instantiate that sidebar controller inside of the view.load, which is the place that you initialize controls and lifecycle in iOS. And then the other thing is to switch out to use that root view controller in your app delegate. So let's do that now. We are going to, so we're going to leave our main view controller. That's the thing with all of the calculator elements in it. And then I'm going to create a brand new one called root view controller. And this is a fairly common thing to do in iOS applications. You usually have one root view controller. And that'll be a public class which inherits from UITableView controller. And we'll have an override of view.did.load. And in the view.did.load, we want to instantiate that, oh, it was back up here. We want to instantiate the sidebar controller, and yes, sidebar navigation. And it takes 3 parameters. It takes this. And this is actually going to look very much like the Android episode we did 2 episodes ago. And then it's going to take the main content area as the second parameter and the sidebar as the third parameter. Well, our sidebar doesn't exist, but for now we can at least give the content area as what we're calling a main view controller. And we're going to need to rename that main view controller because it doesn't match up with Android, and I don't know if now's the best time to do it, but we called it the standard calculator fragment, and I think we should call it the standard calculator view model to match up instead of main view controller. Should we do that now? Weird. No, you're wrong. I didn't make any changes to that. It's complaining because on this switch. Okay, so new main view controller, and then we need a left bar controller. What did we call that in Android? So we can main page adapter standard calculator. Do we have something called a navigation drawer list item, currency activity navigation drawer? I'm not seeing a good parallel. I called it the page adapter, the main. Nah, whatever. We'll just call it I don't know, what did they call it? Theirs is called a menu view controller. That's fine for now. Public class menu view controller of type UIView controller for now. We'll change that later, and we can change all this later. But what's it complaining about? It's got nothing to complain about. And so the second parameter there is, oh, and I'm sorry, 225. Whew. Sorry for all you people on looking on this on mobile devices. Okay, so new menu view controller. There we go. And actually, let's put this in as a field called sidebar controller, like that. And that should be about all we need. It's a real good start. We now have our new root view controller with the left nav and the main nav, and what we haven't done yet is hook that back up. So we've got to go back into the app delegate. And just as a reminder, the app delegate is the place in the application where the app starts. It's kind of important. It is the most important class, the app delegate for iOS. All right. Build succeeded, which means ReSharper has got something going on with it. I don't know if it's worth messing with at the moment. So here we go. Window.rootViewController equals new main view controller. Nope. Instead, we want this to be new, well, root view controller. That should do it. That should be almost everything we need. Now, I don't know if we want to just, we're not going to see anything. We're not going to see anything different until you can actually open up that left-hand menu. So to do that, they show an example over here in sidebar controller.toggle menu. So we need to add one of those. And the way to do that is in our main view controller. And I said we're going to do button CE, right? I said we're going to override button CE. We're going to be quick and dirty, and just in the interest of getting something up, button CE dot touch up inside. So we're going to subscribe to the touch up inside event of the button CE, and we're going to put that into the method there. Always unsubscribe. So we are unsubscribing and doing Control-Alt-Shift down. Nice little keyboard shortcut for jumping stuff down. And now we have to be able to get an instance of inside of our new root view controller. We need to be able to get to our sidebar controller. In order to get to the sidebar controller, we have to be able to get to the root view controller. In order to get to the root view controller, we get to the window, which is in the app delegate. Remember, window.rootViewController. So in order to get to the window, we have to go to the, it's like a UI application, I think. Let's see. UI application dot window. Conveniently enough, actually, he has an example, and we can look in his source code, and we can see in the Xamarin sidebar example, in his sidebar controller, I think, he has a, inside of his sidebar menu area? No. This isn't the right one. Sidebar.cs. Oh, this is the actual code. We don't want his actual code. We want his, it's not a Xamarin Forms sample. It's the sidebar unified? No. It is the simple sample? No. It is the iOS. There we go. And inside of the intro controller. Inside of the side menu controller. Oh, UI application. Oh, UI application dot shared application. UI application dot shared application dot window. No. That delegate. Yeah, here we go. That delegate. And he just casts his as an app delegate, and this is a common mistake I see in iOS. Maybe it's not a mistake, but it's a common thing. The two ways to, if you have something which is a generic object, but you know it's a specific object, there's two ways to do it. You can either say as, and you can do as app delegate, which is what he did, and then you've got some code like this. And I don't know the experience level of my audience here, but the interesting thing about this as operator is that it will cast it, and if it is of a different type than the thing you're asking to cast it to, it will just return null. Problem with that is this could then end up being null, and you have to deal with a null case. Well, what if I know for 100% truth that this will always be an app delegate? In that case, I don't want to have to deal with a null case, right? So I think a cleaner way to do that in this case is just to cast it. And the nice thing is, if for some bizarre reason our shared application.delegate is not an app delegate, we'll get a cast exception. And the cast exception, I think, is more informative than a null reference exception. So in this case, I find this a lot cleaner than the code that he wrote. So now I can do app delegate.window and dot root view controller, and my root view controller is always going to be a, well, first of all, if you look at this and you mouse over this, you're going to see this is a UI view controller. But in fact, I know what type of UI view controller this is. I happen to know that this is a root view controller, which is a little bit confusing because the name is root view controller and the type is root view controller. I probably should have called it something else, like my root view controller. Well, bear with me. Oh, actually, we should just call this, I don't know, yeah, root view controller. And now that we have our root view controller, we ought to be able to gain access to the, let's make this public, and sidebar controller. This is a bit of a leaky abstraction because it would be nice if I didn't have to change, if I were to ever change this out with something, some other implementation, I'm now leaking the information about what type it is, which is a little bit ugly. So, I mean, what would be a lot cleaner is if I kept this private. And instead, I said root view controller.toggle. I don't even remember what was it called. Toggle menu. So we're going to toggle menu, and we're going to call toggle menu on your root view controller. Boom. Done. Run it. If this works, and goodness knows things aren't going well so far, then we will be able to click the CE button. It will jump into the touch-up inside event of the CE. It will then pull down the root view controller, the new root controller that we just created. It will go into its side menu and say toggle the side menu, which will pop open that left-hand menu. Hopefully. Cross our fingers. Ready. Moment of truth. believe it or not, I'm pretty sure that worked. It just popped over from the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side, and because I didn't initialize this menu at all, it's not really doing anything. It's just showing a black screen, but and the frame rate's not very good because I'm VNC'd in, but there is actually an animation, zoop, zoop, which you can't really see. So this is working. That's cool. I mean, that might be worth committing code right there, although let's go a little bit further, shall we? So we want to go back to the root view controller, and let's have it go in from the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. I think that will be a lot cleaner. And so when we do the sidebar controller, I think we can say dot position menu area, menu location. That looks right. We want a menu location equal to left. That was good. And Resharp was saying use object initializer. Yeah, I guess that looks better. Okay, and then the other thing is it was just all black. It would be nice if it actually did something. Let's just make it red or something obvious so we can see that it's working. So we'll say we need to view did load. View did load. We'll say view dot background color equals UI color dot, I don't know, white, black, red, something like that. All right. One of these buttons, this button. If this works, I think that's probably a commit point. We're halfway through the episode. We're gonna get to the table view next, and I think that is some pretty cool stuff. It's gonna work. It's gonna work. It's just gonna pop up from the left-hand side. And when I hit C, it's going to pop open from the left-hand side. Yes, and it's white, and that looks much better, right? You can actually tell, boy, that there is an animation there. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah. Okay. One of the things I like about this particular library is it's a little lower level. You get a lot more control over where you put your buttons and how you do it all. So I'm going to call that a commit. And the CS proj might be a separate commit. Well, okay, let's just do it all. So we introduced the Xamarin sidebar control, and we created a root view controller to house the the sidebar and main content area, and that was that root view controller there. And we main view controller, on click of CE button, open the left nav, did that, and a very simple menu view controller. Let's pop that out into its own class. Now we got into its own file, so we got one file per class, one class per file. It's a little bit easier, and we very simple introduced a very simple menu view controller. Okay, time for a table view. So I don't know how much background to give on this. Table views have Objective-C has this concept of it's like an interface, and it's called my mind has gone blank. An Objective-C template? No. Anyway, it's like an interface, except you can have implementation in it, so it's sort of a form of multiple inheritance, but we don't have that in C#. So you have to do some kind of hacks, and the Xamarin team has done some kind of hacks to make it work. And one of the things they've done, which makes things simpler and also implements both of the interfaces and implementations that you need, is they created a custom view controller called A, and this simplifies the world when you have a single view controller that has just a table view in it. So they have a UITableView controller, and this is a simplification. It's something that makes life easier for you, so that you don't have to create your own UI table view, your own UI table view, and do all and set it up and add it in. It takes care of instantiating that control for you. And you know that this is working because you can say this.tableView, and so this is saving you the effort of doing a new UITableView controller, controller, and then adding it to the view, and then laying it out to the extent of bounds and all that. It's there for you. So that makes things a little bit easier. Really nice when you're just trying to get going quickly. We may need to swap this back out later, but probably this is good enough, and for now this is certainly good enough. So I don't think we need to change the background color, because the table view control will get all that for us. Now, like in Android, a table view has to have a data source, and so we're going to say our table view dot data source is equal to and it's always a good idea to follow along the documentation, and the documentation is actually phenomenal, and I frequently find myself falling back to it, and you should too. And so if you just go into, and the way to get to this is to go to developer.xamarin.com, and then you can go to the guides. The guides are great, and they'll show you cross-platform Android and iOS. And in our case, we're interested in all of the user interface controls here. And I know I'm just walking you through the documentation, but like when you start running into a problem, this is where you need to go. And and one of the things that's just great about Xamarin is their documentation is so good. It makes life so much easier. So we're going to go in and we're going to ask about tables and cells. And they're going to talk about table parts and functionality, and they're going to, we're interested in populating a table with data, and here's roughly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be creating a new table source, table view source. We need to tell it how many rows there are, and we're going to need to tell it how to get a cell. Those are the primary components that are required for a table. So yeah, and so that's basically what we're going to be doing right there. So, and I always get source and data source mixed up, and source is the one you want. Source equals, and so we need a new, you can use an inner class here. There's some contention about what the right way to do it is. Class pages table source of type UITableView source, and that is going to ask us to implement two things, which is get cell and rows in section. And By the way, I don't know if you noticed that nint thing, but nint is a the ints work a slightly different in iOS world, and so when you see a nint, you know that's an iOS type of an int, and I believe it has to do with the bitness. An int in .NET is it will sometimes be 32 bits and it will sometimes be 64 bits depending on whether you're a 32 or a 64-bit operating system, but a nint in iOS is always 32 or always 64. I forget which. And so there's a sort of subtle difference there. Usually you don't need to worry about it, and things just work out fine. So we're going to return, I don't know, we should probably have a constructor which has a list of pages, asks for a list of string. I think this is what we did, pages, and we did this last episode. We created ourselves a view model called a main drawer view model, which had a list of pages. So, and that was a list of string. So, a list of string called pages. Oops. Whoa. Pages. And ReSharper says introduce a read-only field called pages. Yep, do that, and initializes it. Man, I love ReSharper. It makes just so much code disappear into return pages.count, and then we're going to get a cell. Okay, so we're ready for, once something scrolls into view, what do you show? And so there's a newer way and an older way to do this. The newer way to do this is, oh, we forgot to set the source. It's a new pages table source. And let's just do a new list. We'll fix that later. Lots of things to fix, but we just would like to see a list of pages if this goes well. And then in here, we need to do, how do we get a cell? So the older way of doing this would be tableview.dequeue reusable cell. I think that's the older way, although I get them mixed up. There is now a register class for cell reuse. This is the new way of doing it as of iOS 6 Plus, which is a while ago, so it's not that new, but their documentation is maybe still a little bit outdated. Anyway, we need to do tableview.register cell for reuse here, and then, oh, the new way is dequeue reusable cell, and that enables us to not have to do a check for null. So tableview.register class for cell reuse, and we need a cell type, so we'll say type of, and we could create a custom cell at this point, but we don't have to. If the default implementation is good enough to display some text and an image, and so we can just say type of UITableView cell, and then we need to give it a reuse identifier, which is to say if we had like different types of cells, they would each need a different reuse identifier. So we'll call this a page ID or something like that, and we're going to need the exact same one. Hello. Yes, introduce that as a constant. There we go. So when we dequeue reusable cell, we're saying which one we want. We want the one with the reuse identifier. and we're going to retrieve the cell, and we're going to return the cell. And I hope this isn't too much code. We're almost done. Bear with me. I'll walk through this in just a little bit more detail. So, and then we have that cell, which is of type UITableView cell, and now because we used a UITableView cell, we get a number of things by default, and one of them is like the main text area. Text label dot text equals, and I guess we need to get the page, so page equals pages of type, and we were passed in as a parameter the thing that we're trying to get, so indexPath.row, right? And so we've got our page, and so we can just say the text equals page, and we're done. And I'm going to hit F5, and we're going to see what kinds of terrible things I've done and how this is going to break, right? So tables in mobile world are always more complicated than they are in the web world, and the reason is because you're resource constrained, and you very much have to worry about what happens if you have 1,000 cells and you can't load all of those simultaneously. You really just want to load a screen's worth at a time, and as you scroll up, you're reusing them, and so you aren't instantiating a ton of memory all simultaneously. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that worked. All right, believe it or not. I don't believe it. I still don't believe that worked. Okay. Well, we have a list of pages. I think that's a commit, and let's just look over this code. Should we use the real page? Let's use the real pages. To do that, our menu view controller in its viewed loader somewhere ought to be able to get an instance of the main drawer view model, new main DRAWER view model. Isn't that what we called it? I don't know why it's complaining. I don't page names. That should just work. Oh boy. I've done something terribly wrong. This is all just working so beautifully. What have I done wrong? Let's try cleaning. Cleaning, and let's just try building. F5. Do it. It's going to work fine. Okay, we built the mobile calc project. We're trying to build the iOS project. This is going to work. Type our namespace, main drawer view. Oh. Huh. Yeah, we did miss the using statement. That's fair. Alright, that's going to work, and I'm going to commit it. Displays a list of pages. Displays a list of pages in the left in a table view. And just to scan back over the code that we did here, we created a new table view source. We said how many we passed in as a parameter into the constructor, the pages that we want to display. we returned the number of pages that there were, and then we did this get cell, which says how to display one of them. And to do that, it just did a dequeue reusable cell, and it set that reusable cell is a known pattern. It's using a UITableView cell, and the UITableView cell gives us some things by default, and a text is one of those, or a text label is one of those, so we set the text label.text. We returned the cell. We had to register a class for cell reuse, and that was it. Super easy, actually. Oh. Okay, standard scientific programmer date calculation. Woohoo! Looks great. All right, last thing we ought to do before we call this a night is we ought to be able to handle clicking. So let's handle clicking of an event. You might think that this is something that would be instantiated in the TableView source, but it's not. The event is actually handled in the UITableView itself. And if you have a UITableView controller, then that's handled in your UITableView controller rather than in your UITableView, and that is one of the benefits of using the UITableView. So we can just override the it's going to be like select row selected. There we go, row selected, and inside of the row selected we now can, well, I think it's always clean to deselect it as soon as, that doesn't happen automatically, so you want to deselect it. So we can say tableview.deselect row, and which one do we want? Well, the one that was just clicked. So there's that, and then do we want it to be animated? One of the nice things about the APIs for iOS, and I really love the APIs for iOS, that the Next Step people just did a great job with it. Do we want it to be animated true? Yes. More importantly, we want to see which one was selected, and we probably want to go and swap out the main content area, which is currently called main view controller, with a secondary view controller. And so I guess now would probably be a great time to rename main view controller to, what do we call it in Android? Standard calculator view controller. Standard calculator view controller. I don't like the fact that ReSharper's unhappy. That's really bad. That's not going to make things go well in the remaining 5 minutes that I've got. I might have to cancel this. Build succeeded. Okay. We're just going to have to live with ReSharper being unhappy for the moment, in the interests of time and finishing this episode in time. So what do we got? What do we got? We have we need a new view controller called, we'll just call it, what did we call this one? We had the standard calculator, currency calculator, right? We're going to add a currency calculator. Add currency calculator view controller public class currency calculator view controller, and we'll say override view did load. Come on now, come on, view did, oh, because I didn't inherit from a UI view controller, and yes, and override view did load, and inside of the view did load, let's just set the background color of the view dot, so we know that it worked, equals UI color dot red. We'll make it real obvious. And inside of the menu view controller, the thing which swipes in from the left-hand side. Now we are going to, in the row selected, we're going to say we need to get an instance of the side view, and this was some really terrible code that I hated inside the what we're now calling the standard calculator view controller. It was this code right here, which is getting the app delegate and the root controller and all that. It'd be nice if we could just get a root view controller, maybe from the root view controller itself or something. Get root view controller, and that's already static, which is nice. I just would like maybe to put this on the root view controller itself, which is a little weird because you're gonna be like root view controller to get root view controller, which is kind of weird. But actually, let's call it get instance. How about that? So this will be called get instance. That's a nice little refactoring right there. In fact, now we can just inline that. RI, control RI to inline, and then we can do the same thing in the menu view controller. We can say root view controller.get instance dot replace. It's going to be just like this toggle menu, except it's like replace left. Let's look in the documentation. This is for the sidebar, and we don't want to close it. That's handy. Push view controller. That doesn't sound right either. Let's go back to the main documentation that they have, and here there's toggle menu, change content view. That's what we want. Change content view to new content view, and we want to create that parameter in the containing method, and we're going to call this change content view like that. And now when you tap page number 2, we should swap in page number 2. So going back to the menu view controller, root view controller.get instance.change content view, and what are we going to change it to? I don't know. And then we're going to change it to something called new content view. And what is that thing? Let's keep this simple. It's been too long since we've seen any code work. We're going to say if index path.row is equal to 0, then new content view equals, which is a UI view controller, I guess. Then this new view controller equals a new standard calculator, right? Yeah, new standard calculator view controller. Otherwise, if we select anything else, for now, we'll just have it be a currency calculator view controller, and that should be it, F5. Okay. So again, when row selected, if we selected the very first one, then use a standard calculator view, else use a currency calculator view, and we're just going into the root view controller. That's the root level thing. We're asking for its instance, which is a new helper method that we just created, and we're asking it to change the content view to that thing that we just defined. So open the menu, let's select scientific. Hopefully this turns red. Oh boy. That's not good. No. Nothing happened. Did anything happen? Row selected didn't fire. That's odd. Override. Row deselected, row highlighted, rows in section, can edit, move, should highlight. That should have worked. I don't understand. Is it because we deselected it immediately? No. I'm going to try this one more time because, you know, if it didn't work the first time, and in the interest of time, since I'm already slightly over, I just wanted to take a look at what I did previously, because I promise I don't normally do prep for the show, but I did a little bit of prep this time. And so this is what I came up with. And it was override row selected. Exact same thing. The only thing is I deselected the row at the end. But it shouldn't matter. I mean, at the very least we should hit that breakpoint, right? I'm dying to know why that didn't work for me. And let's just open my working version of this code and see if I did anything different there. I set the source equal to new pages table source. I registered cell for cell reuse, row selected, reuse identifier. Wait a minute. Yeah. That all looks exactly the same. Register cell reuse, row selected. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know whether I should end this episode or keep going. I just can't. I can't. View did load. Main drawer view model. Source. New pages table source. Register class for cell reuse. Maybe the order of this is wrong, but that doesn't sound right. Maybe deselecting the cell needs to happen at the end, but that doesn't sound quite right either, does it? Maybe I need to call base.rowSelected, but that shouldn't really matter. And in fact, I was getting an error when I did this earlier, so I just kind of skipped out on it. Let's see. Still got one person with me. I don't know. You can jump in if you think that that I should end this episode, or keep trying a little bit more. Come on. This is the last thing I want to see work, is the table view selecting and then swapping something in for that navigation effect. Man, that is weird. and I'm doing the get cell properly. I am getting rows and section. I think there's one thing that maybe I didn't do here, which is sections, number of sections, return 1, but I think 1 is the default, so I don't think that should be an issue. One nice thing about table views is you can have sections. It's built in, unlike in Android. That is very nice. Right, I did it right there. Inside of the menu view controller, I said row selected. UITableView data source. Oh. Oh. You know, maybe I was supposed to do a data source. Oh, you're supposed to use the data source when you use the UITableView controller. I actually read the documents more thoroughly when I did this the first time, and I was just winging it now. But hey, we learned a valuable lesson that the data source is the one to use when you're using the UITableView controller. This is going to work now. Maybe. All right. Moment of truth. Yay! All right. That was an error that I was getting earlier. Okay, bear with me. We're so close. Just need to get rid of that. And well, as long as I'm thinking about it, I hate this code. We're going to call this get page based on index. Get page from index. This can just be so much more concise if we're willing to convert to this style. A little refactoring here. Eventually that might be a switch statement or something else, but I just find that a lot cleaner. Get page from index, new content view, get instance, deselect row. That reads cleanly, almost like English. It's a lot higher level. One thing I always strive for, and I got this from Uncle Bob Martin in Clean Code, which is like the best book ever, is that you should try to keep everything at the same level of abstraction within a given method. I will try very hard to follow that recommendation. Clean Code, great book. It's all written in Java, but it doesn't really matter. Oh, yay! Okay, fantastic. Man, I'm so tempted to take this a little further, but hey, it's 10:10. Probably ought to call it a night, and so I will commit this. On select of items in the left nav, set the main content area. And to do that, we added a currency, added a blank currency, we added a blank currency calculator view controller. We renamed the main view controller to the standard calculator, a TOR, standard calculator view controller to match Android. and we added a on click on, what did we call it? It was on select, and this was a row selected. We added a row selected event handler in the menu view controller, right? We didn't really need number of sections, we can discard that. So I didn't discard, oh, whatever. So yeah, we did row selected, get page from index, we retrieved the root view controller's instance, and then we set the content view on it, selected a row. Inside our root view control, we added a new method called getInstance, and or called change content view. We also refactored and added a getInstance, so that's in one place, makes things a little bit easier. And then in the main view controller, we just renamed it, and I think Git's pretty good about this, but if I check in both the main view controller and the standard view controller, hopefully it detects it as a rename. It did, it's so smart. And then also it noticed these minor changes about with that refactoring of getInstance. So, and then our very simple currency calculator view controller. All right, I think that's a wrap. I'm going to push these up immediately. And as always, I will add in the show notes about which a tag, so you can go follow along in the code. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope that if you've enjoyed this, you'll subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps me out. Do appreciate it. And I hope you've learned something about table views and how to do hamburger menus and navigation. So until next week, have a wonderful week, and thanks for listening. And now I've got to find this off button. As always, it's somewhere